Hello Year 9 GCSE PE, I hope you are all safe and well. Today's lesson is on the principles of training. Examiners love to give questions about the principles of training, and they're often extended questions. So lots of marks on offer here. So take this lesson seriously, please. It is pretty easy. There are only 4 principles of training that you need to know about for your exam board. They are specificity, progression, overload and variance. In order to access the simple marks, the easy marks, you just need to describe and explain those 4 principles. In order to access the middle grades, you need to apply them to a sporting example, and then obviously for the higher grades you need to critically evaluate why those principles are so important. Okay, and we'll go through that red, blue, green as we go through the lesson. A little bit different today. I have given 2 examples for each principle of training. This green actually is not critical evaluation, it's just the second example. This is the critical evaluation here, which we'll come to at the end of the lesson. Examiners like to differentiate their examples between elite and fun athletes, or the ordinary person. Okay, so I've done that in these examples. Keywords today: specificity, progression, overload, FID, we'll come to that in a second, variance, reversibility, hypertrophy, plateauing, atrophy, elite athlete and a fun athlete, an ordinary person. So look for those keywords please during this presentation. Alright, so first principle of training, specificity. Training must relate to the sport that you play, or the sport that you want to improve in. Now there used to be another principle of training which some exam boards still use, and that's called individual needs, where you work on your individual strengths and weaknesses. Our exam board have put individual needs in with specificity. So if you're asked for an exam for a definition in your exam of specificity, go for the obvious. Training must relate to the sport that you play. It does take into consideration the strengths and weaknesses of the individual though. Okay, so first example, for an elite sportsman. So I'll put my elite sportsman in blue. So if I'm a 100 metre sprinter, I'm going to choose a method of training specific to 100 metre running. So that method of training is going to be plyometrics, or it's going to be weight training, plyometrics to improve power, weight training to improve speed, or it will be HIIT training, high intensity interval training. Okay, that will be at least 50% of their training will be HIIT training. Okay, so that's the one I've chosen. So a specific training method for a 100 metre sprinter is HIIT training. Because high intensity interval training will improve both power but particularly speed. Now for a fun athlete, for my average person, if I want to improve my cardiovascular fitness, my respiratory fitness, my skeletal fitness, my muscular fitness, I just want to do it to an ordinary level, then if I'm a fun runner, then I would do jogging for 30 minutes. Jogging is specific to improving those areas of fitness. Okay? My second principle of training, and people often say that this is the most important. It's not. They're all as important as one another. So there are 2 here, I'll put them together. So progression and overload. So progression basically means gradually increasing the intensities that you work at, both over that particular individual training session, but more importantly, progressively making your training more difficult over the weeks of your program. So it might be, a typical might be 6 to 8 weeks. It might be longer than that, but there must be a gradual increase in intensity. Overload basically means pushing yourself beyond your limits. If you don't do that, you will stagnate, you will plateau. That's what they like to call it in the exams. You won't improve your fitness unless you overload. So you can see why examiners will accept you putting these 2 principles of training together. And instead of calling it progression and overload, they will call it progressive overload. So gradually increasing the intensity that you work at, or gradually pushing your body beyond its limits in order to improve your fitness. The definition's easy. how you actually do it is even easier. That's what the FID is all about. So you can overload, you can make your training harder by applying either the F, the I or the D, or all three, or a combination of them. So what does FID stand for? So you can increase the F, you can increase the frequency of your training, or how often you train. So a practical example for your exam would be you increase your training from once a week in week 1 to 4 times a week by week 6. That's an increase in frequency. You're training more often. So I, what do you think the I stands for? The I is obviously intensity. You can increase the intensity or how hard you work. Now, whatever method of training you select will have different ways of increasing the intensity. And I've given a couple of examples here, which we'll go through in a second. D, you can increase the duration or how long you train for. So, for example, instead of instead of doing a continuous jog for 30 minutes in week 1, you add 10 minutes to it each week. So by week 8, you've added 80 minutes to your 30. Okay? Beautiful. So let's go through the examples that I've given. Excuse me. So the definition. For training to be effective, it must gradually become more difficult. So the example I've given here is an elite rugby player. So I've just said a rugby prop. Wanting to improve his strength would gradually increase his training intensity by adding 2 kilograms and 2 reps to their bench press station each week for 8 weeks. That's a simple way of increasing the intensity. By increasing those number of reps, you're going to increase the duration as well. By definition, you're just going to train for longer if you're doing more reps in each set. So that's a simple way for an elite athlete. Add 2 kilograms. You might, if you want to be more precise, in a weight training program, that prop forward would work around their 1 rep max, the maximum they can lift in 1 rep. So what they might do in week 1, they might work at 70% of their 1 rep max and then add 5% each week for the next 6 weeks. So in week 1 they're working at 70% their 1 rep max, week 2 75%, 80%, then 90%, 95% and then 100%. But they're not just doing 1 rep by that 6th week, they're doing quite a lot of reps. Okay? Beautiful. So for my ordinary athlete, my fun athlete, I've just put a fun swimmer. In order for a fun swimmer to increase the intensity, do 1 more length per session. Simple as that. They might increase the frequency by, instead of training or swimming once a week, train twice a week. Their duration is going to increase because they're doing more lengths each week. Now, if they can increase the speed at which they swim those lengths gradually as well, that's perfect. That's increasing the frequency and the intensity and the duration for that fun swimmer. And their fitness will improve because they are applying progressive overload. If they just want their fitness to remain at a level that they consider that a healthy level, they don't have to keep increasing the intensity. They can just maintain the same intensity. But you won't improve unless you apply progressive overload. As simple as that. Elite athletes keep trying to find an extra 0.5% of efficiency. They strive for it because it'll make the difference between a gold medal and being knocked out in the heats. They're striving to improve all of the time, and so should you be. The 4th principle of training that we're going to talk about is variance. Now, if your training is boring, you're not likely to want to train, you'll become demotivated. You certainly won't apply progressive overload because progressive overload hurts. And if your training is boring and you're demotivated, you're not going to push yourself through that pain barrier. No pain, no gain. You've heard that saying. So training has to be varied. It has to be varied or you will lose motivation. And if you lose motivation, you won't apply progressive overload. So, my example here, but let's go back to my elite sprinter. We've said that he's going to do high intensity interval training. But in order to make his training varied, he's also going to add other methods of training. He might add plyometrics. So in his week, he might do one session of high intensity interval training, one session of plyometrics, one session of weight training, and then he might do something like high intensity intervals but in a pool. So he's running in a pool, so it's against resistance. So it makes his training different. My second example, if I'm a fun cyclist, then just cycling the same route all the time can be boring, demotivational. So change your route. Or you might cycle one day on the road, doing road cycling, and your next day might be on a cyclogometer in your bedroom or in your office or in your gym at home if you're lucky enough. And you might have the TV playing or a motivational video while you're cycling. Okay, so you can make, even that fun cyclist can make his training varied to keep him motivated. The easiest way is to change your route though. These 4 principles of training, as I've said, are crucial to make improvements. And here comes a critical evaluation. If you don't continue to try and improve, then at best you will plateau. At worst, if your training becomes boring, your fitness levels will decrease as your training decreases. So instead of muscle hypertrophy, you will get muscle atrophy. Instead of a muscle getting bigger and stronger, it will get smaller and weaker. So that will impact upon your cardiovascular fitness, because remember, the cardiac muscle, the heart muscle, is a muscle. You train it, you keep pushing yourself beyond your limits, it will hypertrophy. Your stroke volume will increase. Your maximum cardiac output will increase. So avoid plateauing. Apply progressive overload. How do you apply it? Remember FID. In your exam, talk about increasing the frequency, increasing the intensity, increasing the duration, or increasing the combination of all of those things. Keep pushing yourself beyond your limits. Alright? What I'd like you to do now, please, is copy. I've put this presentation on Show My Homework. Can you take it off there, please, and pop it on your mobile phones and add it to your photo album on your mobiles, which you can look at any time. Can you copy this into your blue books, please? Then can you revise it? Revise the definitions, revise the application, revise the critical evaluation. Do that for 30 minutes and then get one of your parents to test you. It is such an important aspect of GCSE PE, principles of training. Thank you.